I'm excited to be here.
It's good to be here.
With not only an author, but a friend, David Dukeson. Finished up, I think, just getting your thoughts out of your mind, your experiences, kind of getting them down on paper. And releasing that. The book Neighborliness can be found on all platforms. And I'm just excited, man. I think that the time that you have put in your journey and what really we're going to unpack here, today, is really going to help, I think, people grab a hold of, okay, what are we talking about when we talk about even the word neighborliness?
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. Well, it is, but at the same time, I think, for everyone understands. I mean, Mr. Rogers, right?
Yeah.
It's like, come on, everybody remembers, won't you be my neighbor? Like that, it means something, to a massive generation. So, man, I would love to start there. Let's kind of start from this place of journeying, because we know each other, we've known each other, we're friends, but we knew each other in a different way. Yeah. I think kind of early on.
What is that, 24 years ago, starting off at school together, right, here at Southeastern University.
That number's getting big.
Yeah. And I mean, when I think of that, we knew each other, but we didn't ever hang out.
Right.
We were here for 4 years together. You know? So it wasn't until 5 or 6 years ago that we started actually hanging together.
Yeah. So. And I remember that, moment of seeing you back on campus. And, for me, I'm like, oh, well, okay, there's somebody that was here. I know that guy. It's like maybe he does or does not remember me. Not a big deal. But then something happened. Right. Like you not only engaged, but then you asked questions I was not ready to hear. And again, that being my assumption was I did not know this about you. Right. And so when that question, those questions begin to kind of interface with me, I said, whoa, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. And then my immediate thought was, what happened? Right. Like, what happened to you in your time away from here that now?
Yeah. Because, that's a big thing, right? Like, you can know somebody and never actually talk. Right. Never actually say anything. Right. So I was like, oh, yeah, what's up, Ray? It's good to see you. What are you doing now? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, see you later. And no substance. But we just, I'd say connected. Not even reconnected. We connected.
Definitely.
Probably 2015, 2016, just started having some good conversations. And I appreciate you being a safe place for me to ask questions as my eyes were starting to be open to racial and economic injustice. I needed some safe places to go with people that I trusted that would actually converse with me. And so I thank you for that. So
yeah. You're already, kind of beginning to utilize language that I think is so necessary for this conversation, right? Like this idea of trust. Right. What does that trust look like? Where are the spaces where you can engage safely? But let's unpack this word neighborliness. As that is not only the title of the book. I mean, it's the work. What you are identifying as a way for humanity really to begin to look at doing life different. Unpack that for us, man. Yeah. What does that look like?
Yeah, neighborliness to me is the embodiment of the characteristics of who Jesus is and was as he walked this earth. Seeing people that were different than him. Not as outside of the family, but as brothers and sisters. When Jesus uses language about people, or even the way that he lived his life, if you just look at the scriptures, he was always with people that were different, even the people that didn't believe in him. Like he hung out with people and laughed and had fun, but his life wasn't just with a bunch of religious people that believed the same way, looked the same way, did the same things. His life embodied the greatest commandment, which is to love God and neighbors. And so neighbor isn't just the person that lives next door to me. It is literally who is a part of the body of Christ, who is in this family together. And so that's what I think neighborliness is the embodiment of the greatest commandment, to love God and neighbors.
That's good. That's really good. So, and again, I want to make sure that even as we, unpack this conversation today, that we reflect on even our journey, because when I think about, us reconnecting 6 years ago, or connecting, right. There was something in your approach, again, even the questions, that not only caused me to think, okay, well, this is new, this is different, this is not the person that I remember because we wouldn't have engaged like this.
And we didn't.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in that new engagement, and us connecting then, you said some things and you used a word that I think is very important. And again, I just want you to unpack, like, what were you thinking? I remember you saying to me, man, I'm your brother.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, that was a big, that was a big thing.
You believed it.
I believed it.
Yeah.
And so again, obviously, there's been some room to grow in that. But when you said that the first time, I thought to myself, like, he's not just saying that.
Yeah.
What was happening then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it started to hit me that my expression of life during the 4 years that I was on campus with you was lacking because I wasn't experiencing life with people that came from different backgrounds, whether it be racial or economic. I kind of had my homogenous circle. And when I said that to you, I remember being nervous. So this is actually funny because this is the first time that we've actually talked about this, right? And we're doing this like for people who are listening and watching.
Right.
So we're getting real with y'all, like on camera and on video, or on podcast. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I trust Ray. Like, looking at the context of your life, being on this campus and advocating for over 20 years now, being there for people, walking through this journey, and your reputation preceded you. And I remember being nervous when I came to you that day because I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know if he's going to want to engage because we've known each other for so long and I've never engaged on this type of level. And it was just received with such grace that made me feel like, I mean, you remember, like, I was like an emotional wreck, like trying to engage in these topics, but being nervous about it because I didn't want to step on any, I didn't want to offend you. I didn't want to step on any landmines that I didn't know about. But I also had in the back of my mind that I've had people say to me, I'm too exhausted to talk about this right now. Like, go read a book and come back to me. And while that was offensive when I first heard stuff like that, now I understand what people are saying is like, I'm not here to be your educator. Yeah. I'm here to be your friend. And so with that, coming back down to the campus, I get to serve on the board of trustees here at the university, so I come down several times a year. I remember thinking to myself, I shot you a text message ahead of time, hey, can we just get together? Can we grab coffee, grab a meal, anything? And when you said yes, and then when I kind of took that first step, it was just really meaningful to me. And I think I would actually like to turn that question, how did you receive that? Like, and were you nervous? Were you as open as you said you were to me when we were first doing that? Because I think that for people who are listening and watching, that what we have developed is tough to get to. Right. I mean, we've had wide-ranging, long conversations about this stuff. Yeah. Like, what was that journey like for you, engaging with somebody who you felt like was real about it? Right.
So, I think it just as, kind of nervous and potentially like perplexed, just not knowing, like, wow, where'd that come from?
What do you think made you nervous? Like, just so that people can relate to what you're saying.
No, and I want to unpack that because I think the nervousness was, okay, Ray, like, this isn't the first time like you've had a moment like this. And unfortunately, I've had those moments, and I've, kind of journeyed with people that got to a point where they couldn't continue. They didn't want to continue. And so, there's always that thought in the back of your mind, like, okay, well, is this going to be another one of those moments? But like you said, I mean, it wasn't just what you said. I mean, it was everything. I mean, all of the nonverbal communication. Like, I just saw someone that really was not, man, they weren't trying to get something out of this other than just saying, like, and you may not remember this, or you might, you apologized. Yeah. For like our time and us not having a greater connection or a deeper relationship. And so to me, when you lead these conversations or you jump into these conversations, and the apology to me makes space for forgiveness, which, again, I think these are words that have to be a part of this conversation if we are going to be more neighborly. And so when that came to me, that was like the immediate sign that he's aware of something that I may have felt like man, that was wrong, or I wish it wasn't like this. It doesn't have to be this way. And when you said that, to me, it was like it began to kind of ease like that nervousness of, okay, was this just going to be? And then I think the thing that you did from that point on is the consistency, like, man, to message beforehand, to stay connected. And I knew that these things aren't one-way streets, right?
Yeah,
so, I think even in that, once you made those efforts, I knew, okay, well, then my responsibility, if it's going to be a friendship.
If it's going to be real, yeah.
Right, if it's going to be real, I have to respond back.
Yeah. And I do think that that what you said, I would interject and say that people couldn't or chose not to continue the conversation. What I've noticed is that when you're exposed to racial and economic injustices in our society, you have two choices. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, actually, because I'm saying it a bunch, so you can correct me publicly. But what I say is that you have one of two choices. You either choose to engage or you have to willingly choose to ignore. So I don't think it's people could not engage further. I think that people have to choose to not engage further. And maybe that point of pain is too much, or maybe it's just like they don't have to. They don't have to think about this stuff, and they can survive in this culture without knowing about. That's a whole other thing to unpack.
Right, yeah.
But do you agree with that statement that people either have to choose to engage or choose to ignore once their eyes are opened?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that statement. I think it is there's kind of this benefit that I think we give to humanity, or I think it is also just kind of the long-standing norm that then becomes like the new norm, where we just conclude, okay, yeah, you're not ready to do that. But I 100% agree that you become aware, like you see something. You may not have all the words to articulate it. You may not be able to define it, to the fullest extent. But you see something, or you feel something, or something's not right, or something needs to be different. And you choose to either engage that further to discover, or you choose to say, nope, I'm okay.
Yeah, one of the things that I, in my studies, I started off studying the cyclical patterns of generational poverty. And then the more that I saw the injustices economically that are happening in our culture, the more I started to realize how much race was playing into that. And when I say race, my definition of that term is not color of skin. It is an economic system that is literally set up to divide people and to classify people so that one group can be above another. And so when I started to engage these topics and see that, I think that as my eyes started to be opened, my relationship with the Lord compelled me to say, who is this? My blindness has impacted people, or my unwillingness to engage has hurt people. And so when I started to have my eyes open, that awareness led into my relationship with the Lord. Like, search my heart, God, like the psalmist David said. Help me to know any way that I've offended you. But it also led to, if loving God and neighbors is one commandment, that means that I had to engage with you. And I just can't thank you enough, man, because like it took courage on your part to even respond to my emotional plea, like, hey, can we make this right? And I just think it's really important to be having this conversation about the journey, because I think that like one of the things that I wrote about in the book is a psychological thing that happens called cognitive dissonance. You look at something and you go, oh, that seems off. But a lot of times people go, oh, whatever. If you don't have to engage it, a lot of times you don't.
Right.
So what are some of your thoughts on cognitive dissonance and like how that, like you look at something and say, man, that seems really off. Like, what do you think some next steps are then for people as they go, man, there might be something wrong with this?
Right. Yeah. And, I think that, again, and I'm thinking about just different portions of your book, when even the idea of neighbor, like if we go back to the story of the Good Samaritan, like when we think about that, at the end of the day, there was no relationship between the Samaritan,
right?
And the man that was beaten. Like there was no, there's no connection,
right?
And so at the end of the day, I think when we think about this idea of cognitive dissonance. I think what we have to recognize is that the things that seem wrong or seem off, it causes you to question.
Yeah.
The question would hopefully lead us to exploration.
Right.
Like, that's the hope.
Instead of like, something seems off, what's for dinner?
Right, yeah. That would be the hope.
Right.
But I also think that we live in a world that has really kind of taught us to avoid those moments. Like, there's a certainty that we desire. And because of that certainty, like that place of actually like walking down that journey and then being, maybe I was wrong about my thoughts, my assumptions, et cetera, like that's not a comfort space. And so I think when we begin to think, or we have those moments where, and I'm sure you'll, be able to kind of unpack this more, when we think about hey, I have this one black friend.
Right.
And kind of that understanding of, okay, that one black friend is not the entire black or African American race.
Yeah.
Like that's not like the entire race. So your friend has a name, and that's that person.
Yeah.
And so I think the macro and micro of going from how do I see the individual with in the midst of like the greater community.
Right.
How do I navigate that and recognize that in the midst of that, when I see things that that was a little off, or I hear things.
Yeah.
Oh, it actually means that I'm supposed to explore that.
Yeah, dig in more. Yeah. Maybe explain to me and to those who are listening and watching, if you're willing, that idea of being somebody's one black friend. And why is that exhausting? Like, why is that? What are some of the things that people may not understand, that there's just pressure that's put on you to be something for them, that kind of, I'll let you go with that if you're willing. If you're willing to,
I'm willing to.
Okay.
And like you said, there are a lot of things I feel like we can unpack, because again, that place of exhaustion. I recently just shared some thoughts on that. I said, I don't have the right to be exhausted. I said, personally, my perspective. I said, this is why. I said, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, those that worked on cotton fields. My dad's family's from Detroit. My grandfather worked at Ford Motor Company for over 50 years. And so when I look back, I'm like, I at a young age, I don't have a right to be tired right now. Like, that's just not, like, that can't be my default. Like, I have a responsibility when I look back to say, no, like, these people lived and died so that I could be here.
Yeah, good.
Like, I have a responsibility. And so that's a whole nother conversation. But, when we talk about, just that one friend, I like to think of it in the kind of in the framework of, like, you become the exception, right? So it's like, oh, well, but you're different. But you don't do this. I mean, I remember literally in 10th grade, no, 11th grade, my junior year, I'm on a basketball team, and one of the kids on the team, he literally said out loud, well, you're not black. And I stopped and turned around and I looked at him, and then he continued to unpack that. And this was his rationale. Again, it just showed you the definition. His rationale was, well, you don't curse all the time. You don't do drugs. You don't do X, Y. And like, he just went down. I mean, every stereotype that you could consider and think about, like, was his rationale as to what.
And this is a predominantly white group, and he's saying to you, but you're not that. Yeah, so you're
I'm not that.
Wow!
Right.
Holy cow!
Well, and the thing that's crazy is, I mean, I had known him for probably 3 years, and I mean, we were in a very diverse setting, and how we had known each other. So it was really kind of shocking to me that he said that. But again, it showed that although you hung out in my spaces with people that looked like me. You didn't understand.
You don't even know what black is.
Yeah, you didn't understand what it meant.
Yeah, and I think that, like, if I'm hearing you right, it's like somebody had a definition in their mind of what black was, and you didn't match it. But hearing that from somebody is like, who are you? Who are you to say that I'm not
100%
black? You know,
right. And that was my response back to.
Yeah,
that was a bad day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But that idea of like being the one. what it does is it simplifies what is a engagement that's outside of our control. Right. So we want to control the situation. Right. Like if I can control the fact that, well, David is this, he's a white male that wrote a book, and if I can do that and simplify you 100%, I feel better about life because I can control that. Yeah. But I don't get to control the fact that, oh, well, but you grew up this way. Yeah. You took a church and moved it to this part of Charlotte and you did X, Y, and Z. That's out of my control. That for humanity, that becomes a lot.
And I think that what's happened in our friendship over the last 5 or 6 years here is that we've started to realize we have a lot more in common than we realize. We're both have families from Detroit. We both are very passionate about the Lord and our own families. We start ticking off the list, not of our differences, but of the things that we can connect on. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's like I tried to. Think about before coming into this conversation, just like the journey that we've been on together. And I just think it's been this really beautiful, eye-opening thing. But I would also say that we pretty quickly moved past, hey, we're going to do this I'm a white guy, you're a black guy thing. We're just gonna get together because we enjoy being together. Right. We're just gonna chop it up and just have some fun. Every time I come in town, or I'm coming in town, one of us is texting each other saying, "Hey, do you have time?" Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but the effort is always there. Yeah. And one of the things that I want to say that I've learned from you, and I want to thank you for this, is there's no way to put these conversations in a clean, tied up box. There's nuance, just like in every other relationship. There's the way that I say something to you can be accepted in one way, but because of our relationship, you can say, hey, do you know what that made me feel like when you said that? There's nuance. And I think that in the body of Christ, can you speak to the need for not trying to just tie up this season where we have more racial and economic awareness of injustices going on? Can you speak to the need for that long journey of like, this isn't going to be clean. It's not going to be, something that just happens quickly. Talk to me about that journey that you feel like would lead you to hope for the future of the journey that includes nuance. Yeah.
I think a part of that journey starts with like us recognizing a very big thing, whether if we do nothing, stones are going to be thrown at us. Yeah. If we do something, stones are going to be thrown at us.
So true, man.
But I think so many people are worried about the stones, like that we're not even just doing the right thing. Come on. And so like we get in these paralyzed, and when you become fearful, you become paralyzed. It means that you're not going to respond. You're not going to see things clearly. You're not thinking things through. And I think when we think about like the long journey, like you said, if I am trying to dress you up to make you fit or to make sure like that everyone is going to be pleased by what I do, I'm never actually reaching anybody. I'm just hoping that I'm not offending everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's not a way to live. Like you can't live that way. Mm-hmm. It then removes like the ability to say I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And so some of this, I think, is even in our efforts, like we're trying to produce something that will alleviate me from having to say I'm sorry, which means that forgiveness is not necessary. If forgiveness is not necessary, then it's not a relationship that we have. And all of these, I think these small, nuances exist like in this conversation. And so what it means, I leave the door open for the fact that I'm going to do something that's is going to upset or frustrate or hurt David. Is that door open in a way where he can come to me, say that, and I can say, man, I'm sorry, I did not think about X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so meaningful, man. I mean, because we've lived out what you just said, in such a meaningful way to me. One of the things that I talk about in the book is this idea of cultural Advil, is that if you have pain in your body, like when I have a headache, it normally doesn't mean that my body is crying out for more Advil. It means that I probably need to drink some more water, watch my diet, something like that. There's something else going on. All the Advil does is mask pain. If I tweak my ankle, my body isn't crying out for Advil. My body is crying out for healing, right? And so what I think we do in relation to racial and economic matters, and I'll say this from the white community's perspective, is that if we're exposed to pain, instead of addressing it, because when we're exposed to pain, it actually can hurt more when you start engaging it. It starts to lead us on this journey of like, oh man, the real eye opener, right, is like when it's like, I'm part of this problem. And instead of digging down deep with something like that, you just pop cultural Advil and you say, you know what, everything's going to be fine. Right. And you want to know what that leads to? It leads to two guys who should have been friends for 25 years that it took until we were in our mid-30s for me to come to you and say, hey, I'm a little nervous about this, but you're my brother and I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry that I never listened to you. And I mean, I'm getting emotional right now just even reliving that conversation, because I'm still sorry that I wasn't there for you when we were on this campus. I'm still sorry that I didn't know what it was like to be in the minority in a predominantly white setting. And so once we put away the bottle of Advil, we have to start feeling pain. And again, the thing that is so meaningful to me is that you allowed me to enter into pain without pushing me away and being like, yo, do that with somebody else. Yeah. You kind of pulled me in and you're like, this is what it was like for me. And the more that you told me about what it was like for you on this campus 20 plus years ago, the more pain that I felt. And so, so thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you for being somebody that I can trust, that has courageously befriended me as I was trying to reach out to you. So what else do you want to talk about?
Yeah, man. So let's kind of move, that our connection and that process forward, because again, to me, there was another powerful moment for me was I remember you kind of talking with me about, man, you have this church and you share about this process like in the book, and you're getting ready to move this church from a very middle class, upper class, wealthy community. You're moving it, I mean, as I call it, like you moved it to the hood, you moved it to the projects,
right. And just a few miles away,
right? Yeah, and I remember you saying that, and when you said that to me, I remember we were standing in front. I can tell you where we were standing. You said that to me, and I thought to myself, oh man, what is this man about to do?
I was thinking the same thing. What is this man about to do?
But you were convinced. You said, man, like, I know that this is what God wants me to do. And to be obedient in that moment, having some idea of, okay, you knew where you were in this journey and you were getting ready to take this journey, but not necessarily knowing where was this congregation going to go and where are they going to follow you.
Well, a lot of them went out the door is where they went.
Well, see, and you have to unpack that, because I want you to talk about that. And then, once you're done, I'm going to kind of come and talk about what I experienced, because I got to watch and experience that from distance.
Yeah. I mean, I remember standing up there the first day. Normally a building project for a church is this huge momentum, right? But it just so happened that we were going to renovate this 40,000 square foot warehouse with 7 nonprofits to be a community center for a historically high poverty neighborhood. And the day that I announced it, 25% of the people never came back to church. The 6 months that we were raising money to do that project, we entered into that building in a building project where we renovated this beautiful building. 50% of the people walked out the door. And what was shocking to me was that when I look back, what I learned is that I was on a journey that we were walking through together. I think that probably, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I could imagine that you're probably like, yo, this guy's out of his mind. Like he's going to take a whole, because our church was predominantly white, right? And what I think I did that I didn't realize, if I could do it a little bit better, is prepare everybody for conversations, because there was a lot of volatility. Things that people would just say that they didn't even know how insidiously evil the things that were coming out of their mouth. I'm not sending my kids to church in that neighborhood. My kids, how are we ever going to do community gatherings in the parking lot of that place? Like, it's so unsafe. And folks had never even stepped foot on that property before, and they already have these preconceived ideas. And that wasn't everybody. I mean, there's a beautiful, courageous group of people that did go with us. But we lost a lot of people, right? Yeah. We lost a lot of people. So what were you thinking when I...
Man, so, I remember you saying that you were going to do that, and we were here, so we had met kind of faced, here in Lakeland. Yeah. Then I remember you going back to North Carolina, and I remember texting you and just saying, hey, man, praying for you.
Yeah.
Before that service.
Yeah, that meant a lot to me.
And then I watched the service, and I'm sitting there, and I'm watching you, share. And like you said, I'm watching people literally stand up as you're talking, in the middle of you talking, and they're walking out. Yeah. And I'm like, I hear doors slamming as people are leaving. And I just remember saying, like, God, give this man strength to continue to do what he knows is right. And I'm here in Lakeland knowing, God, I'm standing with him.
Yeah, thank you.
Because this is what's right.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that there are going to be people that don't understand it, and they're not there yet. It's not that they can't, but they're not there yet. But what he's doing is it's bringing life to people. And so, man, I just remember that, to me, again, that was a moment where I knew no one in their right mind makes that kind of move unless their heart has been changed. Yeah. And so it took me back to kind of that first conversation, because I honestly, I think when you have that initial moment, you live with these questions of, okay, is this real? Like, is this going to be
you're
flaky?
Saying you were saying about me. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Like, for me, I lived with those questions of, like, I've done this before. I hope it's going to be different. And so, we're going to walk this thing out. But when I saw that, I was convinced. Like, you couldn't convince me otherwise at that point. I was like, no, you can say what you want to about, no. Yeah. I watched him not only communicate this, take this step of faith, but I know where he's going. And you don't volunteer to go there unless the Lord has changed your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate that, man. I think that, seeing the next couple of years unfold, probably some of the biggest stuff. I mean, we lost a lot of people. We had people tell us that, because I would speak out about racial injustice, economic injustice. I mean, it was right there on our doorstep, like literally, and people would say, that's not the gospel message. You need to keep preaching the gospel. And what I would always say to people is, not only is this the gospel message, it's embedded in the greatest commandment. Like, when God says to love him with all your heart, it leads us naturally to love our neighbor. If we don't know who our neighbor is and we don't seek to understand our neighbor, then we're not fulfilling this. So this is the gospel message of reconciliation. And, to me, reconciliation is much broader than what I think a lot of people are talking about. Like, this is not about going back to something that we've experienced. When I say reconciliation, I'm talking about going back to the garden. Yeah. Like, I'm talking about going back to the Garden of Eden, where it's like, that is the moment where the perfection of God, and we've got the promise in Revelation 21 of this. So conciliation is actually what I'm after, is healing. Because, like, let's be real, Ray, there's no point in American history that we're going back to where all of a sudden Black people are going to be like, oh yeah, that felt great. Right. That, Native Americans and the Hispanic community and I mean, down the line of non-white landowning men, like, if we're talking about going back to something, let's go back to perfection. Let's go back to the beauty that is found in Jesus.
That's good.
And so that's what I'm talking about there. And, but it's going to take people that are courageous like yourself to trust that people are about it. Because I think that these conversations can be exhausting. And I guess I would have a question for you. What would you say to Black brothers and sisters, Hispanic, Native American, just people that are not a part of the dominant white culture? What would you say about just kind of like emotional health, the self-care in a sense of like, how do you know when you can trust to have those conversations?
Right. No, and you're hitting on, I think another like huge, space that has to be navigated. Like you have to heal and you have to deal with the trauma, or it will deal with you. So like there's no way around that. What I see, in a lot of kind of those engagements often, I hear what you're saying, but what I hear is the result of trauma that has been undealt with. And so I try to kind of, like you said, I love your definition, and you talk about this in the book, that idea of reconciliation and then conciliation. And I love the starting point because I agree with you 100%. That's the point when I say reconciliation that I'm referencing. Right. Because like you said, healing. Because anything else other than that, we're not at that point anymore. So when we talk about, I think, our non-white, communities, A big part of that, I think, is the space of if you have experienced hurt, small or large, doesn't matter. Because ultimately what happens is if I've experienced some sense or some form of injustice or inequality, racism, et cetera, you kind of go down the line, I'm now kind of at this new benchmark, and you have to do something that's worse than what I've experienced for me to feel it the same way. And that becomes a really interesting thing because, and I've heard this said in numerous, conversations in classrooms, et cetera, that students of color will say, you have to top the last thing that was done. So if the last thing that was done was somebody maybe using the N-word or, somebody, making this slur or, or doing X, Y, and Z, you have to top that because if you don't top that, it's not as bad.
Right.
So ultimately what it then also, I think, communicates is that there is a trauma and a hurt that exists.
Right.
You just haven't, if you stab me with a pen and you stab me with a knife, well, one of them hurts worse than the other.
Right.
And so it's that idea, okay, if we're going to move forward in this, we have to deal with these places of hurt. We have to deal with these places of trauma because there's a difference between being broken and being damaged. There's a difference. You can break something and put it back together. Technically, it's still broken. It's been put back together, but technically, you can see the cracks. You can see it's not the same as it was when you initially bought it or purchased it. But if it's damaged, what it means is it's not working the same way. Yeah. And those are two different things. And so I think we end up with a lot of individuals that are still damaged because we're not taking the time for emotional healing, for the self-care, to kind of heal from the trauma. And then once that has happened, then we can start talking and engaging, these other concepts. Because I think when we miss that step, we're adding bandages to a wound that hasn't healed, and everyone knows what happened when you do that. Infection sets in. Then when you remove it, you lose the arm.
Man, that's a good point, and it goes back to what we've been talking about with this journey. Like just because you ignore something doesn't mean it's not going to heal on its own. You have to address wounds. You have to address injustices in the same way that you would address something that has happened to your body. It's not just going to fix itself on its own. Right. And so I think that, conversations like this, and one of the things that I hope for even this conversation, that, as people engage in listening to us, is maybe it gives them some tools on how they could engage in friendship. I guess one of the questions that I would have for you, Ray, is what are some indicators that you would see, and you can answer this as quickly or as long, as you want, but what are some indicators that you're like, that person's real, I can trust them? What do you guys think? What do you think it is that would say to somebody, I can trust that person?
Yeah, I think the person's individual reflections speak a lot to their desire for kind of interpersonal then, engagement.
And just so I'm understanding, the reflections, you're talking about just the natural flow of conversation. What are they talking about as they watch the news, as they respond to things that are happening in culture?
Exactly. Okay. I think when in conversation with someone, when there's demonstration that on their own, they're engaging these topics, whether they have everything right but on their own, you see, oh, no, this person, they're aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
They have done there's been some work that has happened, as an individual. To me, that shows, okay, there's potential. There's either potential for this to move forward in a great direction. We even might disagree.
Right.
But there's potential here for there to be dialogue and engagement that can be beneficial to both of us. That to me that's a huge sign. I think when like you said, the exhausting part becomes, precedent when you're not doing any of those things. Right. So you have no idea what's going on in our nation.
What's our starting point for conversation?
Right, yeah. And so when that's not happening, that's when it's okay, you want me to go back 400 years and now and now I'm the history teacher.
Yeah.
And you want me to bring you all the way back to current.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest eye-opening things for me was when I read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and I started to literally, Ray, I would read this book and I would have to stop. It seemed like after every subheading, I was just in tears because I started thinking about, before I ever came to you and said, Ray, I love you and you're my brother and I'm sorry. Before any of that ever happened, I was sitting there thinking about you as I was reading that book, going, there's things that my brother has had to deal with that I never even cared enough to know about. It's not that this information wasn't available to me about the inequities in our prison system and unequal sentencing of, of people of color as compared to white people for similar crimes. And I'm even saying that very quickly because we know what we're talking about. If you don't know what we're talking about, you got to know what we're talking about. Because I remember that with you when we would engage on something about current events, and I'd be like, yeah, man. And I wasn't like arguing it, or I wasn't like, what are you talking about? You're like, yo, what have you been reading? You know, like you were like surprised that like I actually knew, because then that gave us a starting point of like, that's when you started to open up to me was like, and I don't want to speak into your experience there. I mean, but that's something that I saw in you is like the more that I learned, the deeper and deeper me and you were able to go into relationship. So, and David, I think it's just like any other, relationship. There can be great depth when there's investment. And so we can have that kind of level of conversation, even now, as you said, if someone is not aware of what we're talking about, we're kind of jumping all over the place, kind of hitting, several points. But because of the fact that that individual like work was happening and you were doing that, we were having a very different conversations. I mean, let's just keep it real. I have conversations with you that I have colleagues that I work with, and I can't have that kind of conversation with. Now, let me dig into that, and I don't want to interrupt you, so keep the train of thought. But I would love to, so the flip side of that, what makes you hesitant? So I asked you what makes you trust somebody. What is it that would make you hesitant? And you're not talking about any one person, because there's lots and lots of people to choose from, right? But like, what would make you hesitant to talk to somebody and to open up your experience about being Black in America? So this goes back to, I think, your other point about, kind of the exception or that Black friend. When the conversation moves to, oh, well, but I have a aunt, or I have a grandson, or I have like that doesn't mean anything. Like that's okay, like that's very primary, very surface level. Like, okay, I mean, is that because, somebody in your family like married into, like, I mean, there could be a million reasons why you have some kind of proximity to someone of color. Like that. That's not an awareness. Just as it's visible. And so I think when they begin to share and they are talking about, kind of the relationship in way of, just what's primary and not really kind of digging into and sharing story. Because to me, if you can share story, what it means is you had to spend time in that space. And it's different. Like for you to have story to share, it means, okay, you spent some time in a space, and now we'll understand how much time have you spent kind of engaging that, listening, reflecting, maybe even, kind of asking questions. And so you're saying that you can pick up on that pretty quickly. I think when people begin to, when they begin to live in this space, you pick on it. You can pick up on it pretty quickly. Or the other side of that, if they're not living in the space. If they're not living in the space, quickly. And I have, it's funny, because you'll hear people say all the time, no, you need to correct that. You need to correct. I pick and choose those battles. Right. Sometimes. Yeah, that's not your job. It's not. And it's like, it's not even worth all that. Nope, it's okay. And so, sometimes people will share and say things, and it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And that's why I leave it. That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, you got to go on with your day. You got to go home to your wife and kids and have energy, and you're not getting into every battle. You said something about the word proximity. It reminds me of my buddy, Corey Gaston, and this is available on Amazon. He wrote a devotional about race and like healing in the body of Christ, and it's called Proximity. And it's amazing, and highly recommend it. And one of the things that I thought about when you were saying that is that my proximity to you, I mean, we lived in the same building, and we didn't know each other. It's like I mean, how many people have lived in apartment complexes and don't know their neighbor? Right? Proximity doesn't mean relationship, right? It's proximity with relationship. It's proximity with living together and engaging together that is going to move us from just being around each other to being with each other. And so that's where I think it could be really powerful. So I know that we've only got a couple of minutes left here. What else do you want to talk about before we close up?
I would like to hear, again, for you and your perspective, because I think, we've tried to, in the time space that we've had, kind of touch on, what does that look like coming kind of from opposite sides of the table? For you, like, what not only kept you moving forward in this journey, as a white male, to engage the space, to do what you did? I mean, we can say, oh, well, you had everything going for you. Again, I'm telling you, I literally said this in my mind, when you talk about some of the things that I said in my mind that we didn't talk about, one of the things I said in my mind is, oh man, this man's giving up his stuff to come over to where I live. And when you had that conversation about like moving the church, I was like, oh yeah, no, he's coming over here, like he's becoming one of us. In the sense of you were laying down the privileges that you had to remain where you were. And I remember you saying at one point, I could stay here in this space and I would never have to worry about another thing. It's like the church will continue to grow, it'll continue to be fine. We won't have any concerns. And I remember you saying that, and I thought to myself, again, you're giving up these things to come to this side of the tracks. And those, again, all these aspects that to me, no, this is real. This is a real thing. What would you say to someone that is white or identifies in that way, and they are trying to make that journey, trying to take those steps? How do you keep them encouraged?
Yeah, you're talking about just staying in the game. Well, first I'd go back to one of the things that you just said is I think that we have to, when I look back on a younger version of me, I have to define what does fine mean. We could have been fine. What I really meant there, and not even knowing it, is that I could have lived my dominant cultural expression of life because I don't have to worry about getting pulled over by police. I don't have to worry about injustices that other people have felt. And I can just go on my happy, merry way. But that's not fine. Yeah. That's not okay, Ray. And I started to realize that my answer to your question is like, the more that I have spent extravagant time with Jesus, the more that I realize that it's not fine to live a homogenous existence in my mind and in my expression of relationships. Now, people may live in a predominantly one color community. But that doesn't mean that we still need to diversify our thoughts about each other, our understanding of each other. And then that'll help us move into relationship with each other. To somebody that is trying to stay in it, spend time with Jesus. Yeah. The extravagant time with the Lord, rest in him, delight in him, because it's okay if I spend time with the Lord and I know that I'm supposed to advocate for something that's going to hurt, I know that my strength is not found in me. My strength is in Jesus. And so for far too long, you've had to take shots that if I come over to live with you, and that means so much to me that you said that. I've never heard you say that before. But that means that I can take some shots for you. Like I can step in front of some of those blows and be like, give him a break, man. This is my brother. This is my friend, And you can go home and be with your family, and I'll engage with the person that's being ridiculous in that moment. But it goes back to, are we living a life that embodies what Jesus said was most important? And if that embodiment of loving God leads me to love my neighbors and love my neighbors who are different than me, if that leads to pain and that leads to me being cast aside or me being dismissed or me being canceled by this culture or me being whatever it may be, it's worth it because I love you. Because I love you and I care about you and I mean it from like the depth of my soul. So I would say that people are going to get exhausted if they're just trying to fight this battle on their own. But man, that extravagant time with Jesus, and if people who are listening to this don't know Jesus, he is the only one that brings healing to a broken heart. He is the only one that repairs damage and repairs brokenness and moves it past damage and past brokenness into full healing. He makes us new again. And so to me, staying in the game is directly related to, if I'm really about doing what Jesus said was most important, I don't get to eject from this conversation just because I can. I'm in it, and I'm in it for the long haul, and I want more people to be in it with us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good stuff, man. That's good. So good. Any final thoughts?
Just engage. You know, I mean, we included a small group study at the end of the book. And there's practical steps. It's a discussion guide for each chapter just to get people talking and stuff like that. And there's a practical step at the end of every single thing, like just really, really practical. Like, hey, don't just talk about this, but go do something about it. And the last discussion practical step is choose to engage, refuse to ignore. That's the last practice. That's the last thing that, like, as I pour out my whole heart and soul into this book, the last final thing that I'm saying to people is choose to engage, refuse to ignore. And so what I would say is not just my book, and that is available, neighborliness.com, amazon.com. You know, we've got different, you know, like versions of it, Audible and Kindle and, you know, the physical copy and stuff like that. Definitely engage with the content there. But Jemar Tisby's Color of Compromise, Drew Hart has a couple of really, really good books on these topics, Trouble I've Seen and Who Will Be a Witness. You know, Soong-Chan Rah is an amazing, brilliant theologian. Mark Charles. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. Choose to engage and not just, I'm not here to sell books, man. I'm here to get this message out, right? And so we have some resources on neighborliness.com for churches and groups to engage and stuff like that. And what I would say is whether it's with the content that the Lord has formed through our relationship and through relationships with others, or if it's something else, choose to engage, refuse to ignore.
That's great stuff. Great stuff. Again, David, thank you so much, man, for your time today. You have to grab the book, Neighborliness, and then, as you said, neighborliness.com. The resources and the help to be able to take that journey. It goes back to everything you said, man. If we're going to love God and embody that, that commandment is connected. You know, in order to love Him, we have to also love our neighbors. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
I love you, brother. Appreciate it.